Well, a group of 60 journalism organizations are calling on the EU to do something about Israel killing journalists, detaining journalists, and blocking journalists from covering the onslaught in Gaza. Here is the document that they released. It's pretty gruesome what they detail in it. I'm not going to read the whole thing to you because it is a long letter and they go into quite a bit of detail. But they say here that there's been unprecedented killings of journalists, saying that the deadliest period for journalists in decades that these organizations have been gathering data has been the time since October 7th, saying that 75% of all journalists who've been killed in decades, over decades, okay, over decades, 75% of the journalists killed have been killed in Gaza since October 7th. So this is a massive onslaught on journalists. They're saying that they have been it's not just that journalists are in the wrong place and that Israel has just been recklessly bombing and journalists happen to be there. They're saying that their investigation found that the IDF is directly targeting and killing journalists and their family members, going after them directly, seeing them, not liking them, going after them. They're also saying that they're detaining. There's a high rate of arbitrary detentions of journalists, that they're just rounding them up. They're detaining them. They're being held without charge, typically for 6 months, on grounds of preventing them from committing a future offense, but they're not even being told what their offense is. But we all know what the offense is, and that is drawing attention to the massacre, the onslaught of Palestinians by the Israelis. They say that there's also been enforced disappearances. There have been a couple of journalists who were on the ground during October 7th, and they were documenting what was happening on October 7th. Imagine if you're a journalist in Gaza, you find out that there's a bunch of guys at the fence, at the wall, and they're breaking out. You catch word that they're breaking out and they're going to go do something in Israel. As a journalist, if you're very brave, if you're a brave type, you're the brave type that goes and wants to document that event. We've seen people documenting, for example, January 6th, people that were documenting. And by the way, those journalists got in trouble for it. Journalists that were at the White House, at the Capitol building, I'm sorry, January 6th, they were detained. A lot of them were detained. Their YouTube channels were, like Ford Fisher, ripped off of the internet for just filming the event, being there at the protest. They're then being viewed as being complicit rather than actually just being a journalist who's documenting. If you're holding a camera, you are not complicit. You are documenting what's going on. That's journalism. There were a couple of journalists who were documenting what was going on October 7th. They did not have guns in their hands. They were not involved, and they have now disappeared. The Israelis won't even say where they are. We all know that they're likely in one of these. They might have been killed, since so many Palestinian detainees have been killed. They also could just be trapped in a detention center and being tortured, since there's a high rate of torture. This document also talks about the torturing of these journalists, that they're saying that there's a growing number of allegations by journalists of torture and mistreatment while arrested or detained by Israeli authorities. That's not surprising. We're finding out that they're torturing anybody that they're detaining. Medical workers, doctors, nurses, journalists, it doesn't matter who they are. If you get detained by the Israelis, you're probably going to be tortured. That's, I think, a fair thing to assume, considering everything that we're finding out about their detention centers. They're also saying that they're not allowing journalism in, that this is an unprecedented time when journalists have always been given access. They said, while some restrictions on reporting are common in war, the effective total ban on journalists entering Gaza, both foreign nationals and Israeli and Palestinian journalists, is unprecedented in modern times. They're not letting anyone in to see what they are doing. Why is that? Because they're hiding something. That's why, because they're hiding something. They also say that not only are they killing journalists, disappearing journalists, torturing journalists, not allowing journalists in, but the other journalists, they're not even allowing them to write articles. They're not allowing them to, they're not allowing a free press. We've seen, they said that Israel is banning articles. Government officials have anti-press rhetoric. There's alleged attempts to seemingly control news outlets and attacks on Israeli reporters. In April of 2024, Israel also passed a law that empowers the government to temporarily ban the broadcasting of international news outlets in Israel if they are deemed a threat to national security, resulting in the shuttering of Al Jazeera within Israel. In May of 2024, Israel temporarily confiscated equipment from the Associated Press for providing live video feeds to Al Jazeera. So they're not allowing a free press whatsoever. And it's not just about the censorship. They're killing and disappearing and torturing journalists, targeting them, targeting their family members. So what this group of 60 press freedom organizations are asking for is they're saying, we therefore write to you today to call for the suspension of the Israel-EU Association Agreement on the basis that it has violated international human rights and criminal law, and for the adoption of targeted sanctions against IDF officials and others responsible. So they want the EU. This is where it gets, kind of odd, because the EU is not known for upholding free speech at the moment. In fact, the EU is one of the biggest censor czars out there. And they're asking the EU, I mean, look, as they should, because the EU should be called out for this. They're asking the EU to actually step forward and punish Israel, to suspend the association agreement with Israel. In addition, they say they want European leaders to unequivocally and publicly ask that Israel meet the following demands on press freedom. They want the blockade on international Israeli and Palestinian journalists from independently accessing Gaza. They want that to be, they want them to call on Israel to lift that blockade. They want to revoke legislation permitting the government to shut down foreign outlets and refrain from any further legal or regulatory curtailment of media operations. They want to release all Palestinian journalists from detention. They also want the EU to call on Israel to protect the lives of journalists. They want to ensure that there's accountability for all of this. What are the chances they're going to get any of this from Israel? The chances are really low. But just as a reminder, I do want to play for you a couple of these clips of journalists who've been, we've seen journalists, I know as the war goes on, we tend to focus less on it and to report less on it because we start to wear on it, right? It becomes a daily occurrence that they're killing all these children, that they're bombing mosques, schools, hospitals, they're killing journalists. We've just seen so much of it. And as we continue to call for the end of this onslaught, the end of this genocide and ethnic cleansing campaign, these things are still happening every single day. But I just want to remind you that these have been going on for a long time. Even though this document, this letter is coming out now, this has just been going on for quite some time. If you remember this journalist here who he starts breaking down on camera after his colleague was killed. He's taking off his press jacket and he's just saying, why are we even wearing this? This does not protect us. Watch this.
إنها مجرد شعارات نرتديها فقط، هي لا تحمي أي صحفي على الإطلاق، على الإطلاق لا تحمينا هذه الدروع ولا هذه ما نرتديها فقط، هي الشعارات فقط. نحن هنا ضحايا على الهواء مباشرة، نفقد الأرواح واحدا تلو الآخر بلا أي ثمن، نمضي شهداء فقط مع فرق التوقيت. نحن ننتظر الدور واحدا تلو الآخر. زميلنا محمد أبو حطب كان هنا منذ نصف ساعة فقط وغادرنا الآن، هو وزوجته وابنه وأخيه وكثير من عائلته هم ضحايا هنا في داخل المستشفى.
I mean, just absolutely terrible. Absolutely terrible. This is the list of the journalists who've been killed since the onslaught has begun. This is 120, over 100 journalists have been killed. This was as of July 31st. I'm sure this list has grown. But as of July 31st, more than 125 journalists, mostly Palestinian, have been killed in the Israel-Gaza war, as well as 3 Lebanese journalists and 2 Israeli journalists who've been killed. So this is a massive number of journalists. Journalists put their lives on the line and their reputations at risk and their freedom on the line every single day. It's a very serious job because, look, it's so serious that the founding fathers decided to put it in the Constitution to place freedom of the press is an essential. It's essential to a free society. And that is how you know when a society isn't free, when they are censoring journalists. And Israel is far gone when they're not just censoring, they're killing journalists. That's how far gone they are. Here's another journalist. This was back in October at the beginning of the war, and he's explaining exactly how journalists are not safe. And Many people ignored him. Many people thought, well, oh, especially Israel was making a lot of excuses at that time. They were saying, well, no, we're not killing journalists. We're not targeting journalists. You were just at the wrong place at the wrong. We make mistakes was one of the excuses we've heard. We've heard excuses of, well, maybe you were with Hamas. You're part of them. You're a combatant. We've heard that excuse, but mainly we heard a lot of excuses, and we've heard this. You remember when the first hospital was? We thought the hospital was leveled. The reports came out that it was leveled. It turned out it wasn't. And all of the pro-Israel people said, see, how dare you? You guys jumped to conclusions. Israel would never target hospitals. And the rest of us thought the reason why we believed that hospital was leveled was because you do target hospitals. And now where we're at, we fast forward. Israel says, we don't do this. We don't do that. How dare you accuse us of this? And then you fast forward and here we are. And they've done it. So here's this journalist saying, we're not safe. And this was back in October. And now here we are, fast forward, and over 125 journalists have been killed.
Hello everybody, this is Sami, a journalist from Gaza. I just would like to say that we are a journalist in Gaza. We cannot work anymore. We cannot work safely because there is no safe place in Gaza. We cannot do our job. We know thousands of stories about people who are being slaughtered inside their homes while they are sleeping. But we cannot do that because of safety. Palestinian journalists are being targeted. The same is with the paramedics. I have just come from the nearby Indonesian hospital and I have seen 3 dead bodies arrive to the emergency. 3 dead bodies of 3 paramedics have just been killed maybe 10 minutes ago. I mean that there is indiscriminate shooting, indiscriminate bombing, and we have no safe place anymore, and we have no equipment. Even this helmet and this flak jacket became fruitless because they protect from some shooting or some shrapnel. But the idea is not like this. It is bombing with huge rockets. So even the helmet and the flak jackets became fruitless. And sometimes we use it just to avoid some shrapnel, actually. In addition, we have no internet service. There is lack of electricity. There is no power and no transportation, and even the streets are damaged. That's why we cannot tell lots of stories, thousands of stories of families who were killed inside their houses while they were sleeping. Parents, siblings and children have been killed, and each single one has his own story. We cannot say. The truth is not being said right now. Please help us and protect us, please.
Well, nobody did. Nobody did. There's been now over 100 journalists killed and more detained and tortured, and that is what's happening over in Israel. And it's as this onslaught continues on, what will it take for people who are the staunch pro-Israel crowd to believe us, to believe that there is an ethnic cleansing and genocide campaign going on over there, that the most extreme factions of the Israeli government are in control, and that they have a desire to take all of that land and eradicate the Palestinians? And they're doing it by making life unlivable, unbearable, claiming that they're targeting Hamas, when that is clearly not what is going on there. And now months and months have gone by, and I think more people are saying, yeah, this isn't right. This isn't what I thought. They said they were doing this, and I was on their side, but then, now I'm not so sure. I might think that all these other people are right, and that's what's happening. So, Israel's definitely lost on the narrative. They've lost the plot. People are definitely turning on Israel, and I don't think they'll ever look at that country the same. And now you've got more of these organizations speaking up and saying, what are you going to do about it? What are we going to do about it? And what is the EU going to do about it? What is anybody going to do about it? That is a really, really good question. But maybe just more of the same, just waiting it out until more are killed. How many will it take before people start to intervene and start to put sanctions on Israel or boycott Israel in some way in order to get them to just disassociate at the minimum with Israel, rather than calling them our greatest ally and, we need them and supporting them, just shunning them and treating them like a pariah nation, would potentially be enough to get them to stop, because they value. Now, that doesn't work. Sanctions don't always work, and I'm mostly against sanctions. I do see how boycotting did work when it came to South Africa. So I understand the logic that there can be times when it's used. I think in particular, it doesn't use unless the country values the relationship with the West. And we know Israel does, but Israel is a country for itself. It will make new alliances with other countries. It will do whatever it needs for its own survival, which is why it's not a true ally. We treat it like it's an ally, almost like it's a 51st state. And it's just really not. It's not. They will look out for themselves, which is why we should look out for ourselves, and why we should also stand up and say, as Americans, we are not okay with what you're doing. We are for press freedom. We are not for genocide. These are American values. And you guys are obviously not sharing those same values at all. But we'll see what the EU does, if anything, with this urging from these over 60 press groups. All right, guys, please like, share, and subscribe. Comment down below. Thank you so much for watching.